Hello and welcome to the Business of Meetings podcast. I'm Eric Rosenberg. And in this episode today, I'm delighted to speak with Krimitsos. Chris, an amazing entrepreneur, EO friend, creator of Podfest. We'll be speaking about several topics, including, and not only, but including Start Ugly, his new book, entrepreneurship and great takes on it, and many funny and inspiring stories. Enjoy. Hello, I'm really delighted today to speak with a great friend, an amazing entrepreneur. Guess what? He's put over 2,000 events together in his life. He's the founder of Podfest. He's a friend from EO and becoming the president of EO Tampa. He's absolutely everywhere. He just wrote a book called Start Ugly, which we're going to talk about as well. Chris Krimitsos, how are you, my friend?
Eric, thank you for having me on your show. I'm excited.
Well, this show is also existing thanks to you and the great people you connected me with. So thanks a lot for that. You have an amazing life story journey. And before we get into, the entrepreneurship part for all the business owners listening, can you please tell us a little bit about how you start and especially those two stories that I remember, one about a TV show and people really fighting on the TV show, and another one about guerrilla marketing.
Well, when I grew up in New York, and when I moved to Florida, like a lot of people, I moved to Florida, we attract a lot of unique characters. So they're running away from something, or they're looking for some kind of freedom, so to speak. Right. So I came to Florida looking for freedom of my ideas. So in New York, I love New York. I love my relatives, but they would always tell you what you can't do. And the people that love you most sometimes tell you, that's impossible. You can't do this. So when I moved to Florida, one of the bucket list items I wanted to do was create a television show. And since I wasn't around my family, who I love dearly, so I don't want to sound like I love my big fat Greek family, but there was no one there to say, oh, this is impossible. You can't do that. What do you do? Who do you think you are? So I had just moved here, and you don't know this part of the story, Eric, but unfortunately at that time I lost a mentor of mine, a New York City firefighter. He was my neighbor. He was like a surrogate father for me. So when he passed away, for 2 weeks I was crying, and I created a bucket list of like what, and not the kind of bucket list most people create. Mine was like, how do you want to help other people, and what do you want to do before you leave this earth? So it wasn't even vacations, it was nothing like that. One of them was I want to do a TV show so I could help the masses. And the only problem was I didn't know how to start a TV show. I didn't know anything about TV production. I didn't go to school for production. And I had just moved to this new place where I knew no one except I had an Uncle Jimmy, a relative. He wasn't a blood relative, but like if we tightened it, I knew him since I was a kid. And his son, Jason. So his son says, hey, I'm going to invite you over to my house, and we're going to have a Greek Orthodox priest as our guest, so no cursing. The moment he said that, because he curses more than I do, he did it on purpose to get me upset. I said, you stupid ass. And he started laughing, so I get there and I just create this list, and I meet the priest. And it turns out that the priest is a poet. He's a professor at USF, and he also wants to do a TV show. Oh, wow. I said to him, I have this problem. I said, I don't live in the counties that have the TV shows where you could do training, what they call public access. He goes, well, I'm a professor. I'll write you a letter of recommendation, and I will get you into both programs. And he did. So I would go to the other counties that I did not live in, and based on his letter recommendation, I got to study. And I said to him, at one point, he got very busy. He was a very amazing poet. He said, you keep going and let me know how it goes. I'll live through your experience. Just tell me what your experience is like, and I feel like I was there. So it was an amazing experience. We launched a business show, and that was fun. Very much like this. We have great stories, but I wanted more energy as far as combative energy. Okay. And I remember as a little kid, my dad loved the political debate shows where people would debate and they'd get really upset. So I created a political debate show. And when I created that concept, it was my second show on that TV station. I said to everybody, this show is going to be seen around the world. And one of the ladies said, listen, this is Tampa. Stop saying that. Everybody thinks you're nuts. Now, here's what they say is be careful what you ask for, because you might get it, but not in the way you expect it, So 6 weeks later, brand new show, episode number 6. We have two people that are debating. Actually, it was around Israel. We were debating something about Israel and the politics of Israel. And these two people had debated each other before. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat. And they didn't like each other so much, they reversed their opinions. So the guy that didn't like supporting Israel was supporting Israel just to disagree with the other guy. And the other guy that was pro-Israel went against Israel. So they didn't like each other, obviously. At the end of the show, unfortunately, it got where they started calling each other names. Whoa. And the one guy called the other guy fat. Unfortunately, that must have been his hot button word when he was a child. You know, that's what they probably called him. He left this is a live show, so when someone leaves a live show, there's nothing you can do. Because everything is going out, broadcasting live to the community. He left the lighting grid, and if anyone's been on a TV set, it's like a halo lighting grid. You can't see past the lighting grid. And he picked up this huge stool. It was pretty heavy. No. And literally he threw it across the studio and hit the other guy. Very lucky for us. It hit the table. And at that time, someone told me you should invest in a very good table. So I paid $1,400 for this beautiful wood. I mean, it was the best wood you could imagine. There was a 1-inch scar on the table. That took most of the energy off the chair. Otherwise, the other guy would have been going to the hospital. On live TV, and the show ends like that. Literally, the chair going through, F you, you know, and then roll to black. Our credits go up. Actually, people thought we staged it. My technical director could never get the credits going at the same time. That was the only time he did everything perfectly, is when everything went to hell. So after that, it got leaked to the press. And when I tell you, Eric, 300 media outlets, in other words, every local affiliate station in the country, you know, the Tonight Show type thing, CNN, everybody played it. Wow. We were so famous for that week, and it was infamous, really, but we were so famous for that week that the janitor who only spoke Spanish at the TV station came up to me the next day, and he was telling me, "You're famoso, you know, famous." He had seen me on Telemundo and Univision twice. So it was a fun experience.
How to launch a TV show.
Or not to launch a TV show. Shortly thereafter, I was in trouble with the management of the TV station.
I bet. That's very interesting. And what about this guerrilla marketing? Is that what you call guerrilla marketing, or is that something completely different?
You could call that guerrilla marketing, viral marketing, definitely. So I'll bridge the two stories for you. So that kind of set me on a course where eventually I got thrown off the TV station. Even though I started providing my own security, we would have someone standing just in case. We never had anything like that happen again. But it created a ego conflict between me and the management, because I would get media contacts would call me, and they would be asking for me at this station, and everybody thought I was the general manager, the owner of the station. I never, Eric, you know me, I never alluded to that. But the way I ran my show, so professional, I gave the appearance, and, you know, people see with their eyes that I must be the one in charge of everything. But I had gotten volunteers, and I got people involved. That's what I do. So after that show, I created a little business group. And in the early days of that business group, we were trying to find speakers. So what I did back then, I had very little money, but I invested whatever I had in paying speakers to come speak. And this was during the '08 crash. So I was so virgin. If you told me it's 15,000, I wouldn't even negotiate. I would say, great, 15,000, here's your check. So I got all these big name speakers. Brian Tracy. I mean, these are the old school legends of speaking. And I would just pay whatever they told me, because I had a small amount of money. I said, I'm in, all in. Whatever happens, happens. So one of the speakers I booked, his name is J. Conrad Levinson. He's the author of Guerrilla Marketing. Now, I love marketing. So I assumed everybody will know this man, and I will have 500 people show up to see him speak. Well, I realized how small a niche marketing really is when you're in a small community like I was, right? So I paid, I don't know, $14,000, and I had no money left. After I bought I had paid for all these speakers, there was no money left to market him. I thought his name alone would market him. Right. But his book is all about how to market on the cheap. So at the time, no one was showing up for this guy. I had just paid $15,000. I was lucky if I had 20 people coming, RSVP. So luckily, about 10 days out, one of the guys, it's like, you're bringing in J. Conrad Levinson. This man's a legend. He goes, I'm going to put something in the paper. So that got us 2 or 3 people, not a lot. And then my camera guy, Anthony, who I love dearly, he said to me, why don't we just go to the bookstore and film a little promo? So what we did was we took all the authors everybody knows, Warren Buffett, Robert Kiyosaki, Stephen Covey, and we piled up their books like this on one hand. And then in the other hand, I had Guerrilla Marketing. Guerrilla Marketing sold over 26 million copies. So he has outsold all of them put together. So his books were like this big. And then I dropped them. I said, look, you could see these guys or you could see this guy who has outsold all these guys. And I'm showing him my hands, nice. He has more books. And I dropped the books in the Barnes & Noble, and the lady starts chasing me, and I start running out of there as he's filming, So it cost us no money to film it, and that filled up our room. So it was ironic because here I am, I have the author of Guerrilla Marketing. I spent all the money. I have no money to bring people in, but we're using now his methodology, Guerrilla Marketing, since we're on a shoestring budget to bring in an audience. And we wound up getting over 100 people to the event, and it was a success. And I have friends from that event still to this day, 10 years later.
That's awesome. So if I understand well, the advice to start a business, or you basically enjoy a fight in TV and get kicked out, or you run out of a store without paying and the police chasing you.
Yeah. Right? This is how you run a business. I will tell you, I made a decision a long time ago in my life that I was going to fill up my life with experiences and colorful characters. So I have a lot of stories and a lot of colorful tales. I love business. I'm good at it. But when I've interviewed a lot of these business, big titans of business. And honestly, a lot of them for 40 years, all they've been doing is the same thing over and over, building something. And it's great, but that doesn't intrigue me. The unique people that we have intrigue me. So I love events. So I was able to create a lot of experiences for people and myself and meet a lot of people and create a lot of colorful stories. So I would say I did learn something, by the way, with not the TV show, violence is violence. I don't invite that in anywhere, but from the Guerrilla Marketing, I learned I was overpaying for speakers. I had created a lot of value. And I also did, it changed my philosophy on big name speakers because I got the biggest names we had Brian Tracy. They pull, but what happens is they don't pull an audience for you. They pull the audience that wants to see them. And and you really have to figure out what I call functionalizing your art form. And a friend of mine used to say that you got to functionalize your art. And I always used to say, what do you mean by that? And he would say, you got to know how you work, and then you got to functionalize it so people could see it for your DNA, your blueprint, and then work with those people and grow from there. So since then, I've created my own community and tribe that I've built over the years. And, we create events, and community is really my specialty.
That's very interesting what you're saying, because it's true when you have this big name speaker, that the people come for the big name speaker, and not always the case, but sometimes the big name speaker is there for them. Luckily, less and less over the years that I could experience that. But on your point about experiences, I can only concur that's what I've been doing all my life for corporation. That's what I'm doing also with friends and families. And at the end of the day, I think that's also, especially those days, people are realizing how much is it important to come together, and they're craving for a real experience that are unique, that are tailor-made to their needs and what they want to do. So,
and they want to feel heard, and they want to feel special.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for big name speakers. I know you do too. We love them. We love seeing them.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but you don't want to place too much value on that and forget about the community, which is really what you should be building it. Cause those are the people that are going to support one another and support you if you're doing events and bringing them back year in and year out.
Absolutely. And talking about community, you've created an amazing community that I was lucky enough to experience this year at Podfest. Absolutely magnificent. Congratulations. But you're talking about TV, you're talking about guerrilla marketing. How did you get to start with Podfest, which already 8 years ago, where quite frankly, not many people were talking about it at that time?
So I want to make sure when they hear you say Podfest, because a lot of people hear Podfest. Podfest is podcasting, audio on demand. Listen, Eric, I go on planes with my Podfest shirts, and usually the older ladies can't read the words. and they'll start asking me marijuana advice. I'm just like, no, I go, not that I have any problems with it, but I'm not the expert in cannabis. So ask someone else.
It's so funny because I'm actually going to have a book one day with all the words that I've been pronouncing in the bad way, from saying household too fast in a board meeting up to what you're saying about Podfest, which, by the way, currently I saw this meme on Facebook saying that the funniest thing in Florida now is that you can go into that type of store to buy pot, but you need to go in an alley with unmarked dollars to pay the person cutting your hair, because now everything
That's
is
funny.
closed.
Yeah. So you're actually saying it correct, but it sounds similar. I get it too when I'm talking.
I know, but you know what? You're right, because in all fairness, I talked about Podfest, your fest, your community recently, and somebody understood Podfest. So
yeah, right.
Having said
that's a big trend right now in the country. Both of them are big trends.
True. Now, let me rephrase the question so that we can hear your story, which is fascinating. You create a community for podcaster, which is called Podfest, and which is, by the way, an amazing event that I was able to attend this year. But going back to your life and your story and all the opportunities you see, you're not in podcasting at that moment. Nobody even talked about it. So how did you learn about that? And what makes you say, you know what? I'm an entrepreneur. This is a great idea. I'm running with it.
So you got to know your strengths. So I'm glad so I'll go with my strengths. I learned early on my strengths were bringing people together, the right people together, and creating synergies. So a lot of people will call me a connector, but I was also able at building structures. And some people will always ask me, like, if you're not a podcaster, how do you make money? How do you make a living? And the way I explain it to them to understand, especially for those of us in the meeting business, it's very hard for some people to wrap their heads around how our businesses work. So I always say to them, I said, have you ever been to an airport? Of course, they say, yeah, I've been to an airport. I go, you know how an airport unites all these brands under one hub? They go, yes. I am a hub for the medium of podcasting, and I unite all these brands and these people together temporarily for 3 days amongst this big event, but that's how I get paid for that value. And like an airport, I have small transaction fees that go on throughout that, whether it's tickets, sponsorship revenues, and that's how I make my living. And when I'm able to give people a visual, they're able to understand it. But to get to the question of how did I spot the technology trend early?
Right.
In 1996, I used to go to the computer and I would type in Greece and I'd go look at websites. And they were like static websites with 2 pictures of Greece on it. But I remember then saying, I don't know how this tool is going to be used quite yet, but the whole world will be transformed for it. So I want to be very clear that I had a love I still do, for how technology changes our landscape in many different ways. In 2010, I remember I told you I brought in all these big name speakers. Well, one big name speaker I got for no money, and this is after I learned my lesson, was a gentleman by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk. And Gary was doing Wine Library TV. And all the Gary V, and all I had to do was buy 400 books. And he and I are around the same age, so it was nice to see another young guy doing great, and he saw me down here in Florida. So I bought 400 books, so when I sold the tickets to see him, you got a book. And I bought the books for $10 a piece. So it was a self-liquidating offer. Now, the challenge back then, believe it or not, I didn't make money on that event because no one knew who Gary was. So I was able to pretty much liquidate what I was spending on him, but there was no real profit because no one knew who he was at the time. But we still had 160 people in the room to come see him, which was a lot for me at the time. But I remember one thing about that conversation. My friend from New York used to come down to our events, and he'd fly in every month to just have something positive, and then he'd go back to New York City, where it's very dark and negative in general. Think of New York City as a Gotham sometimes, just people are very pessimistic in how they think sometimes. So he would come down here. Well, it turns out that Gary told us, I don't know what the next move is, but social media is the future. Now, I had already been teaching social media for a year and a half. So I was very familiar. I was like, yeah, of course. And I was doing events, selling out events, 50, 60, 70 people, $200-$300 a ticket in Tampa locally. So my best friend, flies back on a half-empty JetBlue flight, because back then in 2010, the flights were all half full because of the economy. Yeah. And him and Gary got to talk for 3 hours in an empty back of a plane across from each other all the way up to New York. And he told my friend at the time, he goes, I don't know what my next move is, but it's going to be big. And I know it's going to be. So we then watched him go from, a lot of people think he had this all mapped out, but at the time he didn't know what he was going to do next. He was working for his father at Wine Library, which is his dad's company. And he wanted to transition, and he was branding his name. And that's when he became a social media. He created a marketing firm shortly thereafter. At that time, he was not creating a marketing firm yet. He was playing with different ideas. And what I saw was, I was teaching social media marketing for the last 2 years, but he understood that there was an opportunity for this technology on an international level when the rest of us only saw it local, maybe we'll help each other out. So I always said to myself, Eric, is when the next thing comes around under my nose, I will do my best to allow it to grow instead of keep it localized like I was doing. Because I could have had a huge conference on social media back then. I was doing these things. I always localized it. So then one day, in one of my local meetups, I would do 5 a week all across Tampa Bay, every day, Monday through Thursday, 4 a week. And then I had a 5th one for a group of guys. We'd all hang out. So one day, this gentleman by the name of Steve Cherubino talks about podcasting. And I said, can you tell me more about it? And he's like, yeah. And I said, I saw the list. There were so many listeners and there was not enough content creators. This was in 2013. And I saw the writing on the wall. I said, what happened with on-demand video and YouTube is about to happen with on-demand audio. Now, I also knew a couple of things about myself. I'm usually 3 to 4 years ahead of the trend. And I always think the trend is going to pop in a year. So by this time, I was a little bit older and had more patience. So I then created an event called Florida Podfest. 100 people showed up. I invited people outside of Florida, and they would say, well, it's not for me. I go, oh, why wouldn't it be not for you? It says it's Florida Podfest. I live in Nebraska. It's not for, I said, if I deleted the name Florida, would you show up? And this one guy looked at me puzzled. He's like, I don't know. So the next year I deleted the name Florida. I called it Podfest, and people out of the area showed up. We had 181 people. And then my good friend Neil Gilarte said, Chris, you need to take this event out of Tampa and bring it to Orlando. It will internationalize your conference. That's where I cut my teeth on conferences at the level I'm doing it now. Wow. Luckily, he comes from a very proud Venezuelan family. And when he moved to Tampa, I helped him start his video business. And I referred him all the people I knew, and I helped him grow. His sister ran a big resort. She was the service manager of a big resort in Orlando. I drove over there and I said, Neil, I can't put my house on the line for one of these resort hotels with these guaranteed contracts. I don't have that kind of money. He said, talk to my sister. She said she'll take care of you. I went over there and they gave me a $3,500 food and beverage minimum. And I could have up to 500 people with minimal hotel room nights. And I said, wow, I could do this. I did these room nights in Tampa. I'll definitely do this in Orlando. And when I drove home, I called my friend Neil up, still one of my best friends to this day. I said, Neil, this was the first time in my life I ever felt bad for the hotel in the negotiations. I almost wanted to give them back something. I said, why did they do that? Because they were cutting their own prices as I was talking. He said, my sister, his sister's been at this property for 20 years, by the way. So she's the service manager. She told the salesperson, if he doesn't get a deal that's worthy of this guy getting started, I will not service any of your sales, any of your banquets coming up. So I said, why would your sister do that? He said, well, you helped me get established in Tampa. My sister says our family owes you one, and this is us paying you back. Wow. I almost, at the time, I still get teary-eyed to think about that. So this proud Venezuelan family, I helped their son, and then his sister, I think he's one of 5 or 6 kids. She paid me back and gave me my start in the convention side of the business, where I'm now doing the big convention hotels. And you saw Podfest has now doubled and doubled and doubled. It's now close to about, I would say about 2,000 attendees. This year it was around 1,500, but because of coronavirus, we took a hit. We would have been around 2,000. But it's been an amazing journey.
That's fabulous. And I love the story you're telling. We love helping people. And I would say 95% of the time they deserve it. 5% they're taking advantage of us. But I do believe that the givers at the end of the day are the winners, and that there's no other way to live. And then also I love your story about your friend flying back with Gary Vee. Who in the world today would just clear their agenda and fly anywhere just to be seated next to him for 3 hours?
Believe it or not, he didn't even know who Gary Vee was. He would fly in every month for our meetings just to get away from New York and get a positive boost for his business. He was going through a lot at the time.
That's amazing.
And it just so happened by chance that him and Gary were on the same flight back, JetBlue, going back up to New York. And at the time, Tampa didn't have a lot of flights. It was 2010. There wasn't a lot of traffic. So talk about a cool luxury to
serendipity. It was
serendipity. Yeah. It was really amazing.
You know, I have a quick story with that. When I was still in Belgium, I was in the board of the Belgian Management and Marketing Association, and I helped bringing the worldwide head of Publicis to Belgium, Maurice Levy, who to this day has made an amazing impression on me. And the guy is a true leader, absolutely fabulous what he's built in his life. And so I was taking care of him during the day, and in the evening there was a big event with him. And he had different appointment made. I had arranged everything with the cars and everything. And so it was agreed that after he had lunch with all his subsidiaries in Belgium, I was going to pick him and go to different meetings he had in the afternoon and then go to the conference. So I'm getting there on time. He comes in and says, "How are you?" "Good." And I said, "So the car is ready. The driver's ready. He's got your itinerary." And he goes, "Well, that's okay. That's very kind. You don't have to. I'm sure you have other things to do. I'll see you tonight at the conference." And I look at him and said, "Mr. Levy, if it's okay with you, I obviously won't come with you at your appointment. When in my life will I have the chance to sit behind a car with you, not driving, and maybe giving me 10, 15 minutes of your time here and there?" He looked at me, he laughed, he said, "Nobody has ever talked to me like this. Come on." And I spent the whole afternoon in between the meetings.
That's
and
awesome.
I had an amazing conversation. So it's really, try to your luck. The worst thing you can get is a no.
Well, and you wanted to soak up the knowledge, which who doesn't love that,
Exactly. Not only that, but getting the knowledge of people is one thing. And as I've seen it personally in my life, I love learning. And sometimes I can spend too much time just learning and not doing. And that's bringing me to the book behind you, which I love, which I read, which I've offered to people, Start Ugly. I just love the story you're telling. I love the philosophy on it. And so I would love to hear you about how you came about with this book and what is really the moral of the story and what we should be learning from that.
Yeah, so Start Ugly is a unique business book in that it's a story, a fictional story, very similar to Who Moved My Cheese, but a little bit more sophisticated, similar concept about a gentleman that has trouble with change. And it takes place in the early 1900s. And it talks about how all of us, something happens after right now I have a 1-year-old. And as you get older, like my 4-year-old has habits that she likes doing and not like doing. The 1-year-old right now is just learning 24/7. She's falling and getting her bumps and bruises. And as we get older, our habits become much more ingrained. And the book was written kind of a love letter to entrepreneurs everywhere to not be afraid to start ugly, but to understand you have to perfectly execute from that point forward. So you're getting better as you go along. And I'm very fortunate. Thousands of people have bought the book. And, it's about innovation. It goes back to a lumber mill. And the gentleman revolutionizes the lumber mill industry. And then there's a point in the book where he has a decision to make. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't make the right decision like many of us. So eventually he gets it right. And it's a love letter to entrepreneurs. And you know what's interesting? Now with the pandemic that we're all dealing with, I didn't realize, I knew the story was very pertinent, but we've sold now thousands of copies in Kindle because of the people need the story. There's a lot of people now that have been forced into start ugly situations due to circumstance. So I'm grateful that I have something that I could share with the world that hopefully benefits the way they look at it.
Mm-hmm. And you look at it now, and again, I love this idea, this concept of start ugly, but at least start. Do or do not, there is no try, but start, do something and move forward. I don't know who told me that, but that's something that I try to live by. Done is better than perfect.
Yeah, I've heard that somewhere too. Listen, there's some people that start ugly and they're great at the first time out, but the truth is their first time out is still ugly compared to their 1,000th time because you get better. I've done 2,000 events. My first event, Eric, was at an American Legion Hall. That's where a lot of the older war vets meet up. And Mr. Diaz gave me the hall for $300. and I held my first business meeting for the Tampa Bay Business Owners. The air condition broke. It was in June in Florida, and the Legionnaires, they smoked cigars the night before. To say it was an ugly start is, but here's what's interesting. What most people would say, oh, it's a complete failure. I pitched my idea for this community. I brought 99 people in the room. At the end of that session, 20 people signed up and bought into my idea. When I asked them why, because I was like, look, the heat is on. We're all dying of, it's so hot. And I told them to wear suits. They said, we know that you're trying to do something good, and we see through your start, you're going to get better. And that gave me my start. I wouldn't have been doing 2,000 events later if it wasn't for that ugly, that start ugly moment. So,
yeah. And that reminds me of the first time I had to speak in public. It was at an ISEC conference. I was still a student, and it was in Denmark, in the north of Denmark. And I was so scared that I didn't have any saliva, and my lips were thick, and I kept putting my lips down. And at the end, I asked some feedback. People said, no, the content was great. What was the problem with your lips? and obviously, I'm still somewhere more an introvert in recovery. But the point is, doing it and repeating it makes me think of another very good idea from a friend of mine, Bruce Turkel, who's a speaker. And I asked him one day, I said, Bruce, how do you become a speaker? And he said, you have two options. The first one, you land the plane on the Hudson. The second one, you speak and you speak and you speak and you speak. Which I love that. I love that.
That's so true. That's so true, right?
Yeah. And I know you have a very busy life, and I know that, I would love to speak with you hours and hours, but I know our time together is limited today. So in closing of this conversation today, I would love to hear your 2 cents on what business owners should be doing today. We know in the middle of this crisis, we know we're going to get out of it one day or another. And at the end of the day, all our business models are broken. So regardless of what we do. So what is your take on what business owners should be doing today and what they should be thinking of for the future?
Well, besides the obvious of finding hobbies, and when I say hobbies, test technology out and find hobbies where you could learn a different skill or something that'll reinforce what you're doing, that'll make you more valuable in the marketplace as we come out of this. I was just told, a friend of mine told me that this one lady was in a company where a lot of the executives are fairly older. So when all this happened with the pandemic, the first thing the lady did was study Zoom and take classes on how to best use Zoom. She's now become the most valuable person in that ecosystem because now they have to set up all these calls, and she's the go-to person. So create more value. But as far as, I think everybody knows that, and they're doing that. Some people might have their head in the sand, and that's understandable. The bigger crisis out of this will be the mental health challenge that people are going to deal with coming out of this. And what I would tell people to keep sane in these oncoming times is call your most positive friend. Don't call the negative ones that tell you everything's going to be terrible, and have a good laugh or share a story. That'll help keep your inner child motivated and happy, because it's very easy to go into a deep dive of despair. So find your most positive friends, share a laugh, and then meet with your peers. Whatever your peer group is, meet with your peers and compare notes of what they're seeing, what's going on, and you have to hyper communicate. So I'm been on the phone almost every day. I call certain friends, see how they're doing. I check on all different kinds of people. I'm doing a Zoom call after this in a Facebook group. So you have to be active, and when you're with your family, I know it's tough to do. I know you do this well, Eric, because you have a beautiful family. Be present with your children. For those who have children or your relatives or your significant others, and enjoy that time, because we're not going to, one of the benefits of this is we have time with our loved ones that we could look back on it years from now and say, do you remember that time we had 3 months, we're all in the home and we went for walks every day and we saw neighbors we've never seen before that live right next door to us, and they were walking too and we didn't even know they existed. So find the positive. It's so easy right now, and support those healthcare workers, whether it's clapping for them. New York City, you know, at 7 o'clock, they clap for all the healthcare workers. Whether you have a nurse in your life or someone that's going through stuff, see how you could help them. That's kind of my recipe. And I would say, don't tell other people how to act. A lot of people process differently. You know, the first couple weeks after this, it hit me hard because I understood what was about to happen. But then you adjust. But, you know, allow people to process the way they do. But if it's not good to your well-being, like I said, find your most positive person, friend, family, relative, share a laugh, and then, you know, go back and do what you got to do.
I love your philosophy. I love everything you're doing. It's a pleasure to know you. Chris, thank you so much for spending time with us. I can't wait to see you face-to-face at the EO conference or at Podfest in 2021.
Say hi to your beautiful wife and your daughters, and hopefully I'll be touring Gainesville with you one of these days, hanging out up there. I love that place.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, my friend.
Thank you, Eric. Be good, okay?
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Chris Krimitsos, for joining me on the Business of Meetings podcast. Funny and inspiring stories. Guerrilla marketing. And I love the story you told about that and how you started your TV show. Love the fundamentals and the idea behind Start Ugly, your book. And definitely love your entrepreneurship journey. Thank you. And if you have any question or you want to reach out to me, definitely the best way is to reach out to me on the website, www.evenbusinessformula.com. And if you want to join us, if you are a business owner and you want to join us in the community, it's www.evenbusinessformula.com/group. Thank you.